This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 103 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about a topic that I have to admit I know nothing about. I'll explain why in a second, but the topic is travelling as an introvert. So obviously I don't know about this because I'm not an introvert. I'm very definitely an extrovert, although I can be shy, but that's a different thing I think. But as an extrovert, I'm definitely the kind of person who gets a lot of energy from spending time with other people. That's not to say that I can't be alone either. I actually really enjoy time by myself as well, but I do get a real buzz out of being around, interesting and like-minded people. And definitely, I wouldn't ever think of myself as an introvert. However, a number of people that I've chatted to for the podcast definitely are introverts. And so I have some really interesting thoughts on this topic today. So what's it like to travel when you're an introvert? And what can we learn from it? It's really fascinating stuff from my three guests today. So we'll get to that in a second. But first of all, I have to say another big thank you to our sponsor for this episode. And our sponsor is Hands On Journeys. Hands On Journeys are the amazing tour company that took myself and my son to Fiji last month. And I guess when you think about group travel, you might initially think that that's not a place for introverts. I was thinking about this, but then I was thinking back on the members of our group, and I'm quite sure that quite a number of them would consider themselves introverts. So, but perhaps I think Hands On Journeys attracts the kind of people who are going to get along and deal with that well, I think. One of our group members, we were chatting about sort of a related topic, and he said to me, the kind of people who come on these trips are not the party hard all night type. It's definitely not a Kontiki tour. So, yes, maybe introverts are particularly welcome on a hands-on journeys trip. And for me, going on that trip, it was so nice as an extrovert to have that extra company. I didn't realise I was missing it so much. It's always wonderful to have my son along when we travel, and we chat about all kinds of things, but to have some other like-minded people around was a pretty awesome bonus. Anyway, you can see Hands On Journeys trips at handsonjourneys.com, and don't forget, if you want to sign up for any of their tours, you can use my code Amanda10, that's the number 10, to get a 10% discount on any trip. All right, back to travelling as an introvert, and my first guest today is Sam Fisher, and she has a really kind of interesting phenomenon that happens to her when she travels. Well,
I am an introvert.
Really? People often say this to me, and I'm an extrovert, but I'm always surprised by people I've met who, I know you, I wouldn't have pinned you as an introvert.
Which I have to say is because you met me while I was abroad.
Oh, interesting.
Now, I'm not two different people. I'm not,
No.
But there are, I would say, two versions of me. And I've tried over the years to kind of try and articulate this, and I don't know if I'm there yet. But there is the me that lives in my hometown where I know most everyone. And whenever I go grocery shopping, I see 10 people I know. Mm-hmm. And there's that me. And that me is very, very introverted. And will duck down the juice aisle when I don't need juice so that I don't have to have a conversation. But the me that travels, and I swear it's the second the door of the plane closes that I can access that hidden part of me that comes out, and I am like, well, I'm going to strike up a conversation with the person in the seat next to me.
Wow.
I'd never do it otherwise. Like, why? Why? I don't know. But it is one of the big reasons that I just cannot stop traveling, is because I am able to find this kind of part of me. The one that walks up to strangers and asks questions and sits and chats with somebody from the hostel for 2 hours and then, has a new best friend, or whatever it is, because so much of my travel is alone. Basically, unless I can convince family and friends to come and meet with me, and or I am traveling with people I've met on my travels, I'm alone. And again, it's entirely by choice, I suppose. The alternative is not traveling, so it's not really a choice. But I go out into the world alone. And that in and of itself can be very anxiety inducing, especially when most of my past travels have been very far away. They've been Australia, New Zealand, and they've been for a year.
Yeah, it's pretty full on traveling.
Yeah, I book a one-way ticket and I go, well, I don't know a single person in this country, but I'm going to,
Yes,
and
good point.
Poof, I just set off and I go and I see what happens. And there are many moments where I question why the hell I'm doing it. I question what I'm thinking. I question, why did this feel so important to me when right now I just want to like crawl under the covers of my bed and never come out? I mean, there are many moments that anxiety can surface. And I think the more I travel, the less it happens. But I've also come to realize that there are many ways in which I can manage that anxiety. My number one way is that I always find myself a home base.
Ah, okay.
Whether it's a hostel room because I'm just traveling through somewhere, or it's renting a room for 3 months, or whatever, I need my space. I need a place where I can go and close the door and it is just me.
Right.
Because as an introvert, that's what I need to recharge. That's what I need to recenter. And if I don't give myself that, I cannot keep going. So I have found that by doing that, and even if it's, I'm in a hostel room that 3 other girls are sharing, I put on my headphones and I listen to a podcast, or I put in my headphones and listen to a song, and I am alone in that sense. If I can manage to actually be physically alone, that is the best for my introverted self. But I need those moments, and realizing that, admitting that, and then finding a way to do that wherever I end up has been exponentially helpful.
I'm really fascinated by the fact that Sam's introversion becomes a kind of extroversion when she travels. This sort almost split personality thing is fascinating. And to me, it speaks to some of the many benefits of travelling. And the next guest is Michela Fantinel, and she has a kind of a similar attitude, I think. So Michela comes from Italy, but I have actually only ever met her in Australia. She has a real obsession with travelling to Australia. And we've been able to meet a couple of times, which is great. And we finally got to chat recently on Skype to record for the podcast. And so Michela has the feeling that being an introvert is not something she'd like to work on. And that's something that has happened a lot during her travels.
I always regarded this as a negative skill or quality, or you call it character thing. I thought, that's not really good to be an introvert. But I don't think that it's a bad and good as well. It's both. But traveling alone, it may sound counterintuitive, but it has helped me a lot. And you would say, oh, why? Because usually if you are introvert, you're not going to travel by yourself but it did help me a lot, because people, it's something that I've noticed, they approach you if you are introvert more than if you are an extrovert.
Oh.
Because if you are an extrovert, you are very much likely to go to people and talk to them. But if you are an introvert, you don't do that.
Right.
And you wait to talk to you, or you just don't care. I usually don't care if people, but whenever I go, people just talk to me. And even when I really want to be by myself, I always have someone asking me something. Even in Australia is the typical situation because Australians are very much open in this sense. They like to talk to people or to strangers. And whenever they see a woman alone, they just strike up a conversation and just ask you something or whatever. But generally speaking, I've noticed that as an introvert, people just tend to, because they see you are by yourself, you're quiet, and then they think, oh, maybe she wants to, they probably think maybe she wants to get to know someone or speak to someone. But I've seen that it's working better, probably, I don't know, than being more, the one that goes to people and chat to people. I think you attract more people into your life as an introvert rather than being an extrovert. And I think that you should also work on your negative qualities and try to make of these negative qualities a positive one, or just to. Yes, exactly, and this is what I do. I like to be on my own naturally, so I don't have any issues when I travel alone, because I do sometimes feel lonely, but it's a very, very short time. Or it's just a quick. It's not that for days I feel lonely or whatever, and I want to stop It never happens to me. So I'm okay in my company. I'm happy with. But I'm not someone that definitely look to make friends or whatever. I just speak naturally, but I'm not someone that I just want to speak to people all the time, and I have to speak to people all the time. I can be by myself for a whole day,
right? And
I don't mind. Whereas from other people who travel alone, they really have to have this contact. Otherwise, they feel. It's a bit difficult for them to be isolated for one day or a couple of days. They don't really like to be completely on their own. So you are more bound to look for people because you need that contact. You need to talk to people. But in my case, it's not like this. I think that being an introvert is you give the people more chances to get to approach you because they feel you are quieter, and you want to, but obviously not shy, not to that extent that you are shy or that you just don't want to speak to people, not that extent. But just, you are for yourself and you just like to have a conversation, but you're just by yourself, it's just, and you're happy to be by yourself. So
so you seem quite approachable then. I can imagine how that works. I've never thought about it before, but it makes perfect sense to me. And I'm sure I'm quite an extrovert, but I'm sure that when I go up to talk to someone, 9 times out of 10, like that is because I see them and I suspect that they're an introvert and they're just sort of on their own and it's interesting. I never thought about it, but it's an interesting idea.
But this is something, Amanda, that I also came across. I said, why do people talk to me all the time? Or why do they approach me even if I don't look at them? Or I thought it must be because I'm so quiet. I look up. I think I really, it shines through my personality that I'm an introvert. It doesn't look, I'm not the type that, that talk to everyone everywhere. I'm not that type of person, but I'm not shy anyhow. But still, I've noticed. I remember once I was I think it was in Broken Hill or one of those places. Yes, Broken Hill is outback as well. And I was traveling by car. I got there by train, and then from Broken Hill I was traveling by car to Silverstone. All these beautiful places. I love Broken Hill. It's beautiful there. And I was just getting back to my place and just wanted to have some dinner. I was so tired. I was just looking at my table, and at my food, and I was, all of a sudden I hear someone, hey, I said, oh no. And there was this couple next to me talking to me, and I thought, am I hearing right? And then I thought, I cannot be, I don't want to be impolite and not, nice to say, are you alone? I said, yes, but I was so tired. And why don't you join us? I was thinking, oh God. And I just wanted to be by myself. But sometimes I didn't want to say no, because I think it's not polite to say no.
Yes, you don't want to sound
They're
rude.
so nice. I don't want to sound rude. They're so nice to invite me. And I remember that they were talking all the evening, asking me what I was doing and where I was going and why I liked to travel alone. And then at the end of the evening, they said, "Oh, if you are coming to this place," it was somewhere in Victoria, I don't know where, "you have to come to our place and you will be our guest."
This chat with Michela gave me a lot of food for thought, and I'm going to pay more attention to myself in the future and the kind of people that I go up and talk to when I'm travelling, or in fact in daily life as well. Do I think they're always introverts? Is that why I do it? I'm not sure. But I especially like the story of her meeting the very friendly Aussies in Broken Hill and having to summon up the energy to chat and be polite with them. But it sounds like it turned out nicely and they've become friends, which is awesome. Now, my final guests today are Lindsay and Marshall from Tumble Travels, and they are both introverts, as it turns out, but in moving to Spain, they've both dealt with that part of their personality in very different ways.
To start off, we are both naturally introverts rather than extroverts, but I think that moving to another country really highlights those differences in sort of how you confront what you need to do in order to make yourself a home in a brand new place. And so Marshall and I reacted to the situation in very different ways.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say I think this is something that's coming out right now. I think I do need more social interaction than you do.
Okay.
I think that's. I mean, I was a teacher. And I think a lot of my sort of introverted tendencies on my own time, at least, had to do with just being like exhausted at the end of the day from like
so
many overwhelming. Yeah, all right. It was actually more output. The thing I began
performing
to feel,
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I began to feel really starved, I think, at the end of 13 years of teaching from receiving input. Or like talking to people who like have any concern at all for your well-being, or which isn't like a dig on my kids. I think it's just when you're a teenager, the last thing on your mind is like, I wonder how my teacher's doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when we got here, I mean, Marshall has better language skills, and I was so insecure about my language abilities. I'd taken video Skype classes over the summer. I'd attempted to learn Spanish before, but I was so nervous about talking. I didn't want to make mistakes. I didn't feel like I knew enough. And so I kind of retreated to the space where I was trying, to have Marshall be my interpreter at all times. And when you have a kid, like, we would take Emmett to play at a playground, and then I'll be playing with him, and another kid would come up and want to play with his toys, and it would just totally freak me out. Like, why is this child trying to talk to me? And
I don't understand.
Would look at me and be like, "Tell him I don't want to share my toys." I'm like, I don't know how to do this.
That is kind of stressful.
So it just made me want to retreat more and more, whereas Marshall took on this like aggressive friend-making policy.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I think a lot of that is based on like, I don't know how psychological I want to get, but I think a lot of my tendency towards introversion had a lot more to do with sort of anxiety than anything else. The sort of like anxiety about where's my place in the social group? Are they going to accept me? Are they going to like me? And then that anxiety just gets exhausting, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So, a big part of me would be like, it's just easier to not be around people than to feel anxious about this stuff. And then there was a point when I realized that the anxiety was sort of stupid and limiting. And that, and I don't know how I came to do this, but I just sort of like let go of that concern. And once I did that, it became so easy to just like recognize that I really like people. I find people really interesting as a rule. And then, and I think, another part of that was a friend of mine in Austin sort of just, was really, really good at asking, like getting to know someone and being intimate with them very fast. She was very good at that. And I asked her, like, how do you do that? She's like, I just ask a lot of questions. I was like, oh, that's
simple.
It was just so,
I can do that.
It was so incredibly simple. Like you just go up to someone and be like, hey, I noticed you have a hat. Where'd you get it?
Yeah, exactly.
And then when they say where they got it, like, and the good thing about traveling with kids, and one thing I like about it more than, or one thing that makes it a little easier than I think traveling alone or without kids, is that you have an automatic in with almost anybody.
It's always a conversation starter, a kid, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like you're at the playground. There's one other parent there. Mm-hmm. Like they have a kid who's your kid's age. You just say, how old's your kid? And then you're talking.
Yeah.
You
have an instant connection.
I think, yeah. And I also think if you're traveling and you're single, I think this may be more so if you're male than female, but I don't know. But like if you go up to strangers, they're going to assume you're hitting on them if you don't have a
Possibly.
kid. And then that sort of changes the
dynamic is different.
They're going to be more guarded. Yeah. Yeah, they're going to be like, oh, this guy wants something from me.
Yeah.
Whereas if you got a 3-year-old holding your hand, they're like, it's pretty obvious you don't want anything from anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
You just have a cute kid.
Yeah. So, like, I'm thinking of this example. It was only a couple of weeks that we'd been living here, if that, and we were playing at a playground with Emmett. There was an English-speaking mom there, too. And I just, like, retreated to, like, I'm going to go sit at that cafe. And Marshall just struck up a conversation with her. Our kids were playing together. And, like, he just said, like, we should do this again, got her number. And now our kids are, like, best friends. And we hang out with them all the time. And our son gets along with their son, like, better than anybody else that he's ever met. So it was lovely. Just a huge advance. And I think our comfort level and our son to know that he had a friend that he could play with, who he was just having a great time with. So it wasn't just us, it was him making connections. And I think that, had it just been me, like we would just be in our apartment by ourselves all the time. So I learned a lot from Marshall's aggressive friend-making policies.
I love it.
I also, living in a non-English speaking country, anytime I heard someone speaking English without like a Spanish accent, especially if I heard someone with an American accent, I would
go straight
zone in on them. Yeah. If they had a kid with them, if like whatever reason, if I had an opportunity to strike up conversation, I would take it because, it's just so rare to find English speaking people here. And I don't know. So, like,
he took Emmett to go get a haircut, and another woman in the place was speaking English to her, American English to her son, and he was just like, "I notice you're speaking American English." And she's like, "Here's my number." She's also an aggressive friend maker, and she connected us to this wonderful group of North American expats, and they've just become our best friends.
Yeah.
So that's something that I would have never done because I always just pretend that I'm not American.
I just love the idea of Marshall's aggressive friend-making policy, and I am completely going to adopt that on my travels, or especially if I'm heading somewhere for a longer stint. I just love the concept, and I've never done it explicitly, and I want to. So, but also the last example that they gave about meeting someone at the hairdresser reminded me of one of those weird ways that I've made friends in the past. And it was also because, because this friend of mine, a now friend of mine, Tatiana, was quite extroverted probably. But she was getting her haircut in Bratislava where she was living, and so was I at the time, and chatted to the hairdresser who found out, who told her that there were some native English speakers living nearby because they came to get their haircut there. And she said, oh, well, here's my details. Please tell them if they come in for their next haircut to get in touch with me. And we did, and she was desperate to meet native English speakers for various reasons. She was working as a translator and interpreter, and we became friends, and we're still friends to this day. So that was perhaps that was Tatiana's aggressive friend-making policy in action, I guess. Anyway, that's it for our episode on travelling as an introvert. I have learnt a lot by thinking about this issue. It's always good to stretch my knowledge, I think, by talking to people who are different to me in some way. And it was really interesting and hopefully thought-provoking for all of you. So to get in touch with all of these people, first of all, a big shout out to Hands On Journeys. You can find them at handsonjourneys.com, our awesome sponsor this week. And don't forget, you can use Amanda10 for a 10% discount on any tour. Sam, you can find on Instagram at High Hopes Travel. You can find Michela at Rocky Travel, and she's at rockytravel.net. She's just starting some interesting tours, mostly involving kind of hiking and stuff in Australia and Italy, and I will leave a link in the show notes, or just go to Rocky Travel and you can find them. And lastly, I chatted with Lindsay and Marshall. You can find them at tumbletravels.com. And the reason I know them is because they also have an amazing podcast for kids, a science podcast for kids, and you can find that on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It's called Tumble, or you can go to their website for that, sciencepodcastforkids.com. Now, do come over and join our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. There's a link in the show notes, or you can just search Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook. It's lots of fun in there. And all of these links and everything else will be at the show notes. And for this episode, you can find the show notes at notaballerina.com/103. Thank you very much again for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.